It's been a while. I am returned. Some people hate JAX casually. Some people hate JAX competitively. These people are all amateurs. I hate JAX conceptually. Let me explain how I hate JAX. By the way, this is going to be spoiler heavy, and by heavy I mean dwarf star material. Do with that what you will. Let me ask a simple question. What purpose does JAX serve within the narrative of the Amazing Digital Circus? The answer is not as straightforward as a lot of people think. On the surface at first, they are the brash bully of the group, a minor antagonist and basically nothing more. This is what JAX remains throughout almost all of the first half, even maybe 2/3 of the show's run. I am not joking. Then we hit They All Get Guns, and suddenly JAX gets some depth and a few hints to something more, but even then there are issues. There are a few sparse tiny hints that there is more to them, but not much, and even through those, JAX is still, well, JAX. This is a massive problem that did not need to be one. Why? Because for the vast majority of the show, JAX is not a main character, at least in any real sense, regardless of what Gooseworks may have said, assuming they actually said that. I tried to find the original quote, but couldn't. She said a lot of stuff, and a lot of people have tried to put words in her mouth, so I'm honestly unsure of her intent. JAX is a minor, albeit nearly unyielding malevolent nuisance to the rest of the cast. They are unlikable, unsympathetic, and frankly nearly unrelenting in their antagonism. This is an issue simply because, well, assuming Gooseworks actually wanted JAX to be the main character, or at least one of them, that was never demonstrated within most of the show. In fact, they were at best a side character through episodes 1 through 5. JAX even spends most of episode 3 tied up and out of the way. Literally. So we have a side character that gets some development over halfway through the series, becomes slightly more important, but still in no way a proper main character. At best, they are the deuteragonist to Pomni's adorable crying face. At best. Then JAX basically takes over the finale. That would all be bad enough, but that part about JAX taking over the finale is not an exaggeration at all, and their backstory actually makes JAX an actively worse person than they were before, and not by a small margin either. Before, they were just a minor yet consistent bully. Their backstory in the finale, well, this is where I put the trigger warning. I am about to talk about self-harm, and worse. If you are uncomfortable with that, please stop here. If you are still here, I will assume you're okay to go on. There is a big difference between having a tragic origin and being a sympathetic character. JAX's backstory does not make them sympathetic, the exact opposite in fact. JAX has a conversation with another character named Ribbit. They were, along with Kaufmo, apparently a rather close-knit friend group. JAX confesses something, or rather multiple somethings, to Ribbit. This ends very poorly for poor Ribbit, and not because of Ribbit herself. Ribbit is nothing but supportive and kind. Unfortunately, JAX freaks out once it becomes evident exactly what they told her, and maybe even why they did so. Especially at the idea of anyone else learning about it, which it is made abundantly clear Ribbit would never and did not betray that trust, but that does not matter to JAX. JAX proceeds to ignore and then actively gaslight one of his best friends to the point she essentially takes her own life. And yes, that does seem to be what Abstraction is alluding to. This is awful enough and frankly makes JAX irredeemable in my eyes, but it gets worse. JAX proceeds to do the same thing, or at the very least not care to help, when their other closest friend does the same, and when it happens, JAX shows no remorse or concern. In fact, JAX makes a joke of it. I'm not making this up. JAX makes light of one of their best friends' deaths. If it was only what happened with Ribbit, then maybe we can consider it a horrific accident caused by JAX's inability to let their walls down, and not necessarily malicious intent. It wasn't just the once. JAX saw what their behavior caused and decided to continue behaving in that manner, and worse, towards everyone else around them. It's an important note that with the exception of maybe Kane, the circus includes only people that have never done JAX any harm. Zubul doesn't like JAX, but that is entirely based on JAX's behavior, and frankly, nothing else. Zubul is simply done putting up with JAX. Everyone else, frankly, treats JAX far better than JAX deserves to be treated based on their own behavior. So, JAX is okay with being the reason people commit suicide and even actively driving them to do so. This is not a theory or a guess, it is a simple fact of the story. JAX knows what their general behavior can and will lead to in the end, and yet they refuse to alter this behavior in any shape or form, oftentimes going out of their way to cause undue suffering of those around them solely for what they say is their own amusement. I refuse to accept the idea that their behavior is solely about putting up emotional barriers, since even by the chaotic and messy emotions humans display all the time, their behavior is both extreme and unnecessary. With the exception of Kane, and with the possible exception of Pomni, if JAX told everyone to leave them alone, they likely would have, especially after getting to know JAX for even a day. JAX's overt cruelty is pointless. We get a few sparse hints to JAX thinking that they and the rest of the cast aren't real in some sense, but they are there, and JAX has a lifetime's worth of memories from before the circus. There were honestly only ever a few things the circus could have been, and either way it would mean the others around JAX are real in at least the same way JAX is. So that is no excuse for their behavior. In a well-written story with well-thought-out world-building, it is not a problem to have an antagonist be antagonistic to the other characters. However, that idea has limits even with near-perfect writing. If you make a character so intentionally antagonistic that frankly quite a few people begin to think the entire cast could be in actual hell, you probably went too far. And then if you try to shift the goalpost over halfway through the story to make the actual villain an active main character protagonist, you went so far past too far that the finish line is now somehow in a previous iteration of the universe. Even in a story like Death Note, the main character villain is not demonstrably overtly nasty to people, especially not at first. Light is evil, but he isn't unnecessarily antagonistic to the point the audience can't see his perspective. Not sympathize or agree with, just accept that he's doing what he's doing for some reason, maybe even a rational one from his own perspective. Light is actually a good example of easing the audience into the MC being a villain. His first action with the titular Death Note is to use it to save a group of children from a hostage situation. He then rather quickly devolves and goes off the rails from there. You're however not expected to accept the main character being the villain without that lead-in. Even Overlord has the main character trying to not cause or allow undue harm at first. Unfortunately, being overpowered for your setting does not make you a good or competent leader. Ainz is a villain of the story, but it's made clear early on it's not entirely by choice. It is more complicated, but I'm not recommending anyone watch or read that story. It is so dark that it makes 40k look bright. Still, it's another good example of a lead-in. Most of the stories with a villain main character are not serious. They are things like Villainous, Dungeon Keeper, and Overlord, the game, not the manga, where the heaviest emphasis is on comedy. If you want people to accept the villain as a main character outside of those kinds of stories, you kind of need something to draw viewers and readers into the story. JAX had no lead-in to their antagonism or villainy, because they were not a main character. Pomni is essentially the overall main character of the show, and attempting then failing to change that over halfway through is not just poorly thought out, it goes against almost every basic writing convention imaginable. The thing is, going against those conventions can occasionally be interesting, but not if you have either nothing interesting to do, or are trying to seemingly maybe excuse a character's horrific behavior. JAX's backstory feels like an excuse to make them sympathetic, however all it does is prove that they were always the real villain. I am fully aware that Kane was the sort of villain in Episode 8, but let's be honest, he may not even be playing by the same mental standards as humans. He is an AI. And even then, his breakdown is clearly outright caused by the instability of having another AI in his code. Both Episode 8 and the finale together prove this. And even with the instability, Kane still tried to convince himself in Episode 8 that he could figure out how to make the circus members happy, and in the finale, he outright accepts that he was wrong for trying to exert any control over them. JAX, on the other hand, clearly knows the issues their behavior causes, but refuses to address them even in their own head, after they are effectively dead and it couldn't possibly hurt them anymore. Not that it could before, although I do understand mental walls can be hard to break. But the vestiges of their mind rebelling against even the thought of being a slightly less terrible person was some insane work. The backstory is bad enough that I consider JAX utterly irredeemable, and somehow their own internal thoughts reveal them to be even worse than they are in the real world. Well, the circus, you know what I mean. In JAX's unrestrained inner thoughts, they strangle Pomni for fun, sexually harass Gangle, you know, the one JAX constantly bullies, and ultimately refuses to let go of their own pointless BS and self-pity, even when it is their literal last chance to do so. I don't know if there was still time to pull JAX back, but the simple question is, why would anyone want to? It does go to show how much better the other people in the circus are as people than JAX, since there is no way in any reality JAX is taking the same risks Pomni and then the others took to try and help them. And yes, they did think they were taking irreparable risks, since they fully thought Kane was dead and gone. Pomni was consistently glitching out, which has been established to cause actual pain. It was happening to her entire body, and yet she still doesn't regret trying to help JAX, only not succeeding. Even Zubul is trying to help. Think about this. JAX is a better person as an abstraction than they ever were as an actual person, if for no other reason than they aren't consistently and pointlessly bullying the others. I do not know what Gooseworks was thinking with the finale, but the execution was not just iffy, it was absurd. Shoving all of the other characters to the side to give an abusive monster the spotlight is horrifying. I honestly don't even know what Gooseworks was trying to get at here. Maybe the message was that not everyone is willing to accept a helping hand. Maybe that it's possible to be a terrible person regardless of your gender identity. Maybe that childhood trauma is incredibly difficult to move past. Maybe not everyone can be reached with kindness. Maybe JAX was supposed to be some kind of cautionary tale about the cycle of abuse, although that one is incredibly unlikely since no one else in the circus reciprocates his behavior in any real sense. Maybe Gooseworks somehow met Rebecca Sugar and spent way too much time with them. That would explain a lot. The simple truth is, JAX was the villain of the story, and had basically no redeeming qualities. And the more we learned about JAX, the worse they got. That is the end of the massive rant portion of this video. I will say this, I actually really enjoyed most of the show. I do not think Gooseworks is a terrible writer or showrunner. However, that finale is what the majority of people are going to remember most about the Amazing Digital Circus. When you stick the landing, it brings together your entire routine. However, when you stumble at the end, fall over, and somehow break multiple bones that didn't even hit the ground, people are going to begin dissecting everything that led up to that particular fall. This means that almost anyone who has seen the finale will never again be able to watch the rest of the show without the finale in the back of their minds, coloring their enjoyment for better or worse. I am sure there are people out there who loved the finale, and I'm glad. Regardless of my opinions, it was still the culmination of years of hard work, sweat, and artistic endeavors. I don't like the majority of said finale, and I have given my reasons, but that doesn't mean I begrudge others that enjoyment. There are definitely people who would think I have bad taste for enjoying Fallout 4, and not only do I know the main story for that game is at best poorly written, I have also made multiple videos about the poor writing in that game. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop playing a game I legitimately enjoy. Heck, there are people out there who think Minecraft is somehow not a real game, but that will not stop me from playing it. All that being said, if you enjoy a work of legitimate art that others don't and you're not hurting anyone, enjoy that art. Okay, I wrote this after nearly completing the editing. As I was editing clips for the video, I was kicked in the emotional gut by the scene of the rest of the characters saving Pomni after Pomni refused to give up on JAX. Especially hearing Kinger make it clear they never would have let her do this alone. There aren't many things in fiction that can make me consistently cry. I think this scene will prove to be one of them. Pomni is a better friend than JAX could ever deserve. It's painful to realize that JAX was doing to Pomni unintentionally exactly what they did to Ribbit, dragging the other down with themselves. If you pose the question, isn't she lovely, about either Ribbit or Pomni, then the answer is almost certainly yes. They are both, in the end, kind, loyal, and if you fall, theirs will be the first hand you see reaching out to help you up. If you pose the same question about JAX, well, the answer is not just no, it's how could you ever think that? I'm really confused by the choice of song. If it was supposed to be a Pomni, it'd be appropriate, but I don't think that's the case, considering the editing shows JAX alone about 50% of the time. Now, it's been a very long time since any of my audience has heard me say this, so, from the bottom of my heart, thank you for listening to my inane ramblings.